Welcome. My name is Lorenz, and this show is all about the possibility of presence. Today, we're becoming present to shame. This is a subject that I have spent years becoming intimately familiar with, deconstructing it, processing it, transforming it. And what I'd like to do is share some of what's worked for me in case it might serve you. Shame really began to open up in my life when I discovered how it permeated almost every aspect of my life. I remember I was having a conversation with a friend of mine exploring situations that brought up anger for me. And he said, well, what's an example? And I said, well, sometimes when my wife asks me to take out the trash, I'll have anger come up for me. And he said, well, that sounds like shame. How is that shame? You see, before that, I always thought that shame was a situation where, I have a cookie and I eat it all without offering you any of it. And so I feel shame about that. And for me, that's not the kind of person that I am, so I don't experience shame. But what I realized is that shame is about see me as I want to be seen. It's a condition of not being enough the way I am and wanting other people to see me in a particular way. So in the case of the trash is wanting to be seen as the man about the house, somebody who thinks of everything and is mindful, and feeling anger, a defensiveness when that expectation isn't being met. So the first part about dealing with shame is really discovering the subtle nuances with which it can appear in our lives. Right? Shame can be very subtle. It doesn't have to be this big thing about something that you did wrong or something that's wrong with you. It can really show up in your ways, in your life, in very subtle ways. And when you can become aware of that, there's a freedom that can begin to emerge. And it's for me, it's been a very gradual practice of discovering more and more subtle ways in which this concern about being judged or looking stupid or what will other people think shows up in my life and constricts my expression, constricts my ability to just be in a space with people as I am. What I want to do is share just a few ways that I've dealt with this. So the first is to test what happens when I try something differently. So what this means is to do something differently once as opposed to trying to change myself permanently. This is the difference between eating a healthy meal once or eating healthy for the rest of your life, right? It's very difficult to eat healthy for the rest of your life. It's very easy to eat a healthy meal once. So in the case of testing it, very often shame is coupled with some sort of assumption about what a person will think or do. For me, a lot of this is revolved around social situations where I might feel that I might be afraid of being judged or looking stupid or concerned about how people will think. And so when I first started working with this approach, I would think about the next time I would have a social situation. And then I would just create a plan for how I might act differently. So in my case, it manifested as kind of withdrawing and not really expressing myself, because if I expressed myself, then I might look stupid and be judged. And testing it meant stepping into a different way of being for one conversation. So not trying to change myself permanently, but just stepping into a different way of being for one conversation. And then observing what happens, gathering data. So there's no right or wrong here. There's no succeeding or failing. It's just a test to see what happens. And what I discovered right away is that rather than what I expected, which was feeling like a person was judging me or thinking I'm stupid, is that actually it drew me to them. That because I was being real and present and authentic and expressing myself more, it actually created a space for a genuine relationship to be built. So if you want to learn more about this approach, there's an amazing body of work out of Harvard called Immunity to Change by Lisa Leahy and Robert Keegan. And they really outline an entire framework for this process, but you can do it simply by just trying exactly what I suggested, which is think about a situation where you might be challenged and just try something different to test the boundaries of your assumptions around that. The other thing that you can do to work with your shame is to share it. Sometimes the last thing we think about doing in trying to process a feeling of not enough is just sharing that authentically and honestly. We spend so much energy trying to compensate for something that's in this shadow area of ours, whether we don't trust ourselves or don't quite feel safe with another person or somehow feel like we're not meeting that person's expectations. The last thing that we think about doing is just sharing that openly and honestly. I had a major breakthrough in a relationship with my mother when first I realized that the source of my what will other people think fear really started with hers. What will my mother think? And when I was able to share that with her in a conversation, first, that was one of the most terrifying conversations I had, but it also was one of the most liberating conversations I ever had. Because it really opened up that space, and it took something that I had been masking for most of my life and expressing as really withdrawing. It took that and it put it into an opening for us to be with, to really resolve that and to be authentic in a very deep way. So you can think about, where there's something that is really uncomfortable for you and how you might share that in a safe way with someone, to not blame or accuse them, right? So this isn't about, you're judging me all the time. This is about, the reason I am this way is because I'm afraid of being judged. So there's a very vast but subtle difference between those two expressions, right? On the one hand, you're blaming another person for how they're making you feel, and on the other hand, you're taking full responsibility for how you feel. And when you take that full responsibility, it creates a space where you can begin to process and resolve that. So I just want to outline the three things I just suggested, which is becoming present to the subtle ways in which a sense of not enough or a sense of shame might show up in your life, and really holding that with tenderness. 2 is testing it, really testing some of these assumptions around not enough, really exploring what's there and stepping into very gentle new ways of being that can allow you to gather new information. This can be incredibly liberating, just to see that all of these things are just ways of being, and that you have a choice around the way that you're going to be at any moment in your life. And 3 is to actually step into a very radical form of authenticity by just sharing what's there for you, like not being ashamed of the shame. This is the kind of like rabbit hole of shame, is that, the only way out of not enough is just being okay with what is, right? Because whenever we try to do something about not enough, we're propagating that underlying condition, right? I feel like I'm not enough and I need to do this, that I'll be enough, right? But what I'm really doing is just propagating that not enough. So the only way out of it is just to choose it, accept it. And one of the most powerful ways of that choice and acceptance is to share it. You know what? This is what's there for me. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just what's there for me. and that can open up a tremendous space of relationality with another person, and it can really give that other person permission to be equally authentic with you. I want to share two more techniques here that are maybe a little more advanced, but they've really opened up a lot of freedom in my life as I've unpacked them. One is to bring a physical practice into it. A lot of the tension around the shame can be stored in the body, and so you might discover that you have a visceral anger response in certain situations, and that is a really powerful indicator of that there may be something in your body that you're avoiding, and it's something really uncomfortable, right? In my case, when I find myself getting really angry, if I really tune into it, there's just it's maybe one of the most uncomfortable feelings in my life, and really being with that shame as a physical sensation. But it can be very powerful to just sink into it, to allow it to be, and kind of expand it into your body. And this is a very gentle, subtle, iterative process that takes time and nurturing to ease into that. And so one part is just becoming fully present to it in the body, and the second part is to actually bring a physical practice into it to work with it. It might be some form of breath work or something like Qigong or Kundalini yoga, but this, with practice, this becomes something that you can really begin to process intentionally. It alchemizes it and actually processes that energy into something that's usable for you in a more constructive way. And the final thing that I'll share with you is to really explore what's underneath that experience. And this is something that can take a lot of inquiry. Why do I feel that? What's underneath that? What's underneath that? Well, what's underneath that? In my case, when I started to really sit with the shame and inquire into it, what I discovered was that underneath all of that, there was a tremendous sensitivity, a very deep sensitivity that was being masked by that shame. So in a very real way, the shame is a gateway to your heart, because you can ask yourself, well, why do I care what other people will think? What's underneath that, and really following the thread of discomfort. So much of this work, unfortunately, is about following the thread of discomfort, but really following the thread of discomfort to the origin, you might discover something underneath that. And in my case, it was a very deep sensitivity. There was almost too much for the world, and there's a very good reason why that gets masked in our lives, because at a particular point in our youth, we just might not be able to handle it. And so there's a defense mechanism that shows up in order to help us survive. And that's okay, right? So that's something that we can include in our experience today. It's something that we can just be with and allow ourselves to explore that and very gently begin to step into it and discover what's underneath there. Right? This is the possibility of presence, is becoming very deeply present to the consistency, to the makeup, to the ingredients of your experience, and tracing that experience to its origin and discovering there. Very much a process of discovering what is there. So I hope this has been helpful to you. Exploring shame in this way has transformed my life and opened up a lot of space. And it's not even that it's gone away. It's just that it very often is still there, but it's something that is in the space of my experience, something that's just there, and that's okay. And I can choose to be different. And with practice, that choice becomes easier. It becomes easier and easier the more I just discover that shame as something that's in the experience of my being, and that's okay. It's just something that's there. My friends, I wish you well. Much love.